Everyone, welcome to Michael's Record Collection. I'm very excited to have with me from the band Enchant, Doug Ott is my guest. Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How's it going, buddy?
I'm doing really well. I appreciate your time today. I wanted to talk about a couple of very big milestone anniversaries here. We've got 30 years of this one, A Blueprint of the World, and we're celebrating 20 years of Tug of War. Can you believe it?
Yeah, it's hard to believe. It really is.
Before we get to those records, I want to ask you what I ask all my guests, which is, Doug, what was your first favorite record?
Oh gosh, my first favorite record. That's a hard question. I know what my first album I bought was on my own, which was Boston, the very first Boston record, 1976.
Okay.
My dad wanted me to get Hotel California, but I went with the heavier record. But I mean, it's hard to say. Favorites change through the years. There were albums I listened to all the time. By the time I was 17 or 18 years old, that I just couldn't stop listening to. But if you were to give me a genre or an actual band, I could probably give you a little better answer than that.
Do you remember how you first got into music? How you like what was that starting point for you?
Well, my dad listened to music all the time. My house was just filled with music. I was born in 1964, so by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, 1971, 72, around that era, there was so much music on the radio, AM radio especially. Well, there was no FM radio yet, but AM radio. And my house was just filled with music. My mom was a singer. She was in a band when I was a little kid. I sang in the choir with her and my grandmother. So music was just part of the life. We were always singing and dancing around and listening to music. And I never thought about playing music until I went to my very first concert in 1979, which was Cheap Trick and Pat Travers.
Oh, no
And
kidding. I
yeah,
just
and I
saw
remember,
Cheap Trick last week
oh,
or two
yeah,
weeks ago.
huge fan, huge fan. And I remember walking out of the concert just thinking, like, how do you get that job? That's the coolest job in the world. I mean, watching everybody's face in the bands, watching the audience reaction, feeling my own reaction. And I told my friend who I was with at the time, God, I really wish I could do that. And he says, well, you have to buy a guitar first. And so the next day I took my paper out money and I bought my very first guitar. That was December 27th, 1979.
Wow, that's great. You got a great memory. You got dates and everything.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I still have the ticket. So
Awesome, awesome. Now I noticed we're going to talk a little bit about Enchant and what you're up to now, but I noticed that the website seems to be offline. The Facebook page hasn't had a post since 2022. What is officially the current status of Enchant? Does it still exist?
well, Ted, our singer, Ted Leonard, he moved to New York, upstate New York. His stepson was ill, and his family, him and his wife wanted to move there to try to support their son while he was going through this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
he's been there ever since, and it's been at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. I think he's been gone. Um, but we still talk and everything. Ed and Sean and Bill and I still live in the Bay Area, so we see each other, get together. We jam every once in a while. We've been talking lately about making another record. So Ed and Sean and I have been getting together and kind of jamming on some ideas. I talked to Ted about it a couple months back, and he said, "Dude, write some music," and I'm totally down. So it's just a matter of us getting off our asses and doing something, honestly.
Got it. And Ted's been obviously busy with Pattern Seeking Animals and Spock's Beard, and he went on tour with Transatlantic. So
Yeah.
between that and what he's been dealing with his family, I'm sure he's not had a ton of time to devote to it either.
Well, he said this to me. He said he hasn't written a song in like 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And, with Pattern Seeking Animals, the other guy in the band, John, he writes the material pretty much. Um, and with Spock's, I think this is probably the last song he wrote was for Spock's Beard. And that's been a while too. So, life comes and you get married and you have kids and mortgages and all these things. And sometimes it kind of takes you away from the thing that you really love. And that's really what happened with us in a lot of ways. But we still, we're not disbanded in any way. Yes, the website went away a long time ago. My Facebook moderator was going through some stuff on his own. He lives in Paris, and so he stopped kind of working on the stuff. And since we haven't had anything going on, there's nothing been really to report or talk about. So we
Mhm.
just kind of let everything kind of just lie until we fire up again.
Got it. Um, Tell me about your history with the band. How did you come to join Enchant? Because Mayday existed, and then I'm not clear on how your involvement started.
Well, Mayday was a five-piece band of a bunch of college kids, and I was in a band called Chapter, and it was like progressive, but not really heavy progressive. It was more of a lighter progressive in the, I want to say Floyd kind of Genesis kind of way, Saga-ish a little bit. And we played a festival kind of gig out here in California in Oakland, and I saw the band play, and I was like, God, these kids are amazing. And they had much more of a Genesis, Yes, kind of IQ, kind of a vibe, which I love.
Mhm.
And my band had more of a poppy kind of a thing going on, which was fine, but it just wasn't really speaking to me the same way as listening to their music. And the drummer of the band, who was Paul Craddock, he watched my set after they played, and he thought, man, that guitar player is amazing. I really wish I had a guy like that in my band. And turns out his two guitar players were leaving. They were going off to college in another state. And he said to me that night, hey, can we get together and have dinner or something? I want to talk to you about some stuff. And I said, sure. We got together at a Moroccan restaurant, drank some Algerian wine, and he asked me to join Mayday. So I did, and I got together with the guys that were in the band at the time. It was Mike Benignis Geimer, who was our keyboard player for a long time,
Mhm.
and another gentleman by the name of Brian Klein, who played bass and sang most of the material. And then I got in the band. We started playing together. I started bringing in my song ideas, which the very first song I wrote for the band was Oasis.
It's a good way to
And
start.
thank you. And the guys were like, oh my gosh, like, wow, what a song. We didn't know you had this writing ability as well. And honestly, I didn't know I did either. Even though I was writing for Chapter, I never had really sat down and really focused the same way as these four, the other three individuals were very focused on music, and they were all accomplished guys. They had all studied theory. I was a self-taught guitar player, so I didn't really, it took a while for us to kind of do this, but
Mhm.
it happened very quickly. And after we played a couple of gigs, and he'd gone on as Mayday for a little bit, I asked the guys, like, what's the deal with the name Mayday? And they said, oh, it doesn't mean anything. We just, Paul was taking Latin and he made just a play on regular spelling of Mayday. And thought it was kind of funny. And so I said, well, maybe we should pick a song, a band name that would, more suit what we do. And so we decided to um, walk away, come back, reconvene the following week, and everybody was going to come up with a name. And I was looking through the dictionary, trying to figure out different names and stuff. I dropped it. And when I reached down to pick it up, it was open to the page that said Enchant. And I picked it up and I read the definition, um, to rouse through ecstatic admiration through song or incantation. And I thought, that's exactly what I want my music to do. And I thought, this is the name. Brought it to the guys. Everybody else had something that was horrible, pretty much. Sorry, guys. And when I told the guys the definition, the Webster's definition at the time, um, they were like, "Man, that's great. Let's go with that." So that's how we became Enchant.
That was very fortuitous that it opened on that particular page. That's the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've told that story to a few people, and they said, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it was kind of crazy." I actually have the word and definition framed in my studio above the door, and it reminds me every time I walk in, what exactly the band means and what the inspiration was behind it.
Mhm. Now, you guys went in to record Blueprint of the World, and you weren't happy with the way it came out.
No.
So, how did Stephen Rothery become involved with producing five of the songs on this record?
Well, we met Steve at a show in LA. Um, We had played with Marillion. We had opened up for Marillion in San Jose at an old club called the Cabaret that was really well known for progressive music at the time. It was connected with KSJO, this radio station, and they had a show called Stone Trek with Greg Stone, who did nothing but progressive music. I think it was on Sunday nights.
Okay.
And we all listened to it in the Bay Area because, anybody who was in Prague, we had very few outlets at the time. So we all listened to Stone Trek, and Greg was a cool dude, and he liked our music and played some of our demo material on the radio and got us a bunch of different gigs at the Cabaret. And one of them was opening up for Marillion, and it was a Season's End tour. So we kind of met the guys a little bit, not really, just kind of said hi to them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We loved the band so much. We were huge fans. And we thought like the transition with Steve Hogarth was amazing. We loved the energy that the band had with a new singer. And we decided to go down to LA, follow them. And they played at the Whiskey. And we decided to go down to watch the show. So we watched the show. And after the show, the Rainbow Bar next door, we decided to walk over there. And there was Marillion sitting in a booth. So we walked up to him, started talking to the guys. Most of the guys didn't want to talk to us. But Steve was very gentlemanlike and started talking to us about music and different things. And we handed him one of our demos. And, there was a card in there and with number on it. And he contacted us and said, wow, I really like what you guys are doing. This is really cool. And Paul and him started kind of establishing a relationship. Then Steve came out to visit California on a vacation. And he brought Pete with him and Hannah Stobart and asked Paul to play drums on the Wishing Tree project.
Oh, okay.
So they were in contact quite a bit. Paul and Hannah fell in love and got married, and they've been married ever since. And, Steve and I hit it off really well. And when we were making Blueprint, he called us and said, how's it going? He was just super excited about the outcome of it. And, I basically told him, I'm not happy with what's happened. I'm not happy with the producer we were using. He wasn't really capturing the band the way that I thought it should be captured. And he said that he had an extra couple of weeks at Park Street Studios in Liverpool, which is owned by Genesis, or at least was at the time, after they had done Brave. And they had recorded all of Brave. And he said, I got 2 or 3 weeks. I think it was 3 weeks, actually. He was going to work a week with Wishing Tree. And he said, why don't you and Paul fly out, bring the master tapes, and we'll see what we can do. So we went out there, worked with Steve, went over as much as we could. We replaced some guitar parts, replaced some keyboard parts, replaced a few things here and there, and then remixed. I think it was 7 songs that we actually did with Steve on that record.
Okay. Yeah. So we had, I think in the liner notes, it talks about the Thirst, Catharsis, Acquaintance, East of Eden, and Nighttime Sky.
That may be right. It's been 30 years.
Yeah, so. No, I'm not holding you to anything. Yeah. But yeah, and then he also played a little guitar outro solo on Nighttime Sky and did some EBO for you on the Catharsis song.
No, he did EBO on the intro to the Thirst, actually.
Thirst, yes, that's it.
Yeah,
bad.
But we couldn't use his name because of contractual obligations that he was under. So we had nicknamed him the Compiler in the studio after working with him for 2 weeks because he had this great way of recording. And he would say, okay, Doug, go play the part, and I would go out and play the part. And he would say, okay, play it again, play it again, play it again. And he would take 5 or 6 takes of it. And then he would go through and say, okay, let's take the first phrase here, the last phrase here from this third version, and the middle section from the last version or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he would compile a track. So Paul and I started calling him the Compiler as a joke, and it kind of just stuck with us as a kind of funny little nickname.
Yeah. Now by the time these came out, these remaster or reissues, he was no longer under that restriction. You could go ahead and name him at that point. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So the initial Blueprint lineup was yourself on guitar, Ed Platt on bass, Ted Leonard on vocals, Paul Craddock on drums, and Mike Benignis Geimer on keyboards, with Stephen Rothery helping out with a couple of the songs, as I mentioned. And I'm not going to go all the way track by track, but some of these I got to mention. You've got some concert staples to this day on this album. The Thirst, Oasis, Mayday. Um, these are all ones at Death's Door. These are all very commonly played at Enchant shows. These are fantastic songs. When you look back 30 years later, do you hear an album? Do you hear the flaws in the album, or do you feel like this thing is what you guys wanted to put out at that time?
Well, musically, it was exactly what we wanted to put out. Sonically, recording wise, it was not exactly what we wanted it to be. Listening to the record for me is very, very difficult because I do hear all the flaws. I do hear all the things that are wrong with it. But I do also hear, I want to say, maybe more of the raw brilliance of the ideas that were there, because at the time, Paul and myself were really the main writers of the band, and him and I worked so hard on those songs, and all the way through, to when Paul's departure after Juggling Nine. We worked so hard on those records, and I was very proud of what we did. I just always wished that we could have re-recorded it and made it sound sonically the way we wanted it to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my only really complaint. I mean, I think I became a better guitar player as I got older, and same with everybody in the band. Ted became a much better singer. Everybody improved. We were pretty young. We were all in our 20s when we made that record. So, you always look back and think you could do better. Hindsight is 2020, and I look back at other albums that we've done, and I feel way more, impressed by them, because I think we started working with better people. We started honing our craft a little more, and our end results, I think, came out a little better than Blueprint. But Blueprint, writing wise, I think was a very, very strong record, and it made a very big impact in the prog world for us. So I've never, not liked it or anything like that.
Yeah. The fact that some of these songs are still favorites among your fans, that's got to be very satisfying to you as an artist, that some of the early stuff that you put out when you were young and raw and full of energy is some of the stuff that still connects with people today.
Oh yeah, I think it's amazing. I can't tell, you can try to express how it makes you feel. You can try to explain it. I tell this story every once in a while to people. When we were on tour and we were at some festival in Germany, and we were going to play Acquaintance, and Ted put the microphone up to sing, and all of a sudden we realized the audience was singing the song, and we had no idea that the album was making any kind of impact at all, really, at the time. And that's when we were on Dream Circle Records that went bankrupt, and that was a whole other story. But I mean, Ted just turned and looked at me, and I looked at him, and I was like, oh my gosh, people know the song that I wrote in my bedroom back in Concord, California. Like, how did that happen? So yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and that, not to just pick that song in particular, but I've had people email me and contact me and ask me to do an acoustic version for weddings and things. I have a couple that actually took the lyrics, had them carved into a giant piece of wood that hangs above their bed.
Wow.
So I mean, it's very touching. It's very touching, and I'm always, when everybody in the band has always been so appreciative of anybody that's even mentioned our name.
Yeah. When I think of that song, it's lyrically, it's one of my favorite Enchant songs in your catalog, and it's certainly one of Ted's most emotional vocal performances.
Yeah. Interesting story on that, if we have the time.
Sure.
I did not like Ted's vocal on the song originally.
Really?
And he was not, and this is nothing against Ted, because he's one of the best singers out there, and he's my brother. I love him to death, but he just wasn't feeling it. And I put on the producer hat a long time ago, and I, was in the studio going like, no, man, this isn't working. This isn't working. So we decided to break for the weekend. Well, during the break, a girl that he was very, very much in love with decided that she didn't want to be with him and broke his heart. Mm. He came back on Monday and laid down that vocal, and he felt it. He felt the heartbreak in the song. And that's why it turned out the way that it did. I'm so glad we didn't keep the original version because it was kind of flat. And I'm sorry that Ted had to go through that, but at the same
Yeah.
time, he suddenly realized what I was talking about in the song, and it really, I mean, he was in tears in the studio singing the song, so it was pretty powerful.
Pain has created a lot of great art. It's
That's for damn sure.
at least there's something that good that came out of it. So that's great. Oasis is a song I wanted to bring up because I love the traded vocal lines in the verses that almost overlap. I wish bands would do this more often. I was just talking about this very subject with Jim Peterick from Survivor and Ides of March about a couple
Oh,
weeks ago, because he just came out with his new Pride of Lions album, and there's some of that on that album. And I just think, and it's really one of the things that he had originally envisioned for Survivor doing more
oh
is
wow.
trading vocals. He and their original singer. So I think it's one of the things that I think that as a fan of music, I don't know if musicians know how much fans like that kind of stuff, but I think it's fantastic when a band has multiple singers that overlap, and I love the way you guys did it on the live album.
Yeah, it's like I said, it was the first song that I'd written for Enchant. I came in with the intro riff, and I said to the guys, like, hey, I get this idea. And we played through it a couple times, and everybody was kind of getting their part together, and uh, nobody else could come up with anything. And I said, okay, like, I'm trying to write with you guys. Here's a really cool thing. Like, come up. So we got back then we used to practice Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week. So like it was on a Monday or whatever. We showed up on Wednesday and no one had an idea. Showed up on Friday, no one had an idea. And I said, come on, guys, it can't be that hard. And I just wrote the verse right in front of them. And I was like, what about this? And they were just like, oh my gosh, like, wow. And I ended up writing the whole song. That night I went home and wrote the lyrics and wrote the rest of the song. And the trade-off part, to me, it just made sense. It was almost like somebody in their own head listening to their two voices,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way it comes off.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it was. Like, here's a guy out in the wilderness, it's all a metaphor, obviously, but, by himself. And that's the way I was feeling at the time. I was very alone, feeling very alone, not sure what life was going to bring. Young man with a lot of aspirations, and trudging as hard as I could, trying to get to that goal. And it's an epic song. It's a really epic song. I another song that I had written, and Paul helped me with the middle section of that song. And I loved the back and forth with it, and I tried to do that in a few other songs too. And when I became a better singer and started singing more with Ted, and a lot of that has to do with singing next to a guy as good as Ted is.
Mm-hmm.
It became a lot of fun for us because we did like things like that in The Thirst, and we did it in Oasis, and we did it in um, um, Transparent Man on the last record, where we're trading off and doing this back and forth kind of thing. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fun for the listener as well. Mayday was a song that you guys put out as I mean, it was basically your concert staple opener. Love the ethereal opening. The opening reminds me a little bit of something Arena might have written, but once the guitar kicks in, it's identifiably Enchant.
It's interesting because back at when I put that song together, we had changed the name of the band. We're moving on as Enchant, and I thought, like, well, there's this whole era of a band that no one will ever know existed. So I said, I got to write something as an ode to the first incarnation of the band. And I thought an instrumental would be great. And in my mind, I was thinking it'd be great to have something that was really powerful and interesting to open a show with. And I was at our studio. We had our studio at Paul's house in Lafayette, California. And I went there by myself one night, and I sat down with the keyboard, and I just started sequencing the background part. And then I came up with the guitar part. And when I played it for the guys, the following couple of days, they were like, wow, this is really cool. And it was an ode to the old band. I mean, that's really what it was. And we did use it for a long time as our opener. It's very powerful. It's fun. It's, it has a lot of tension in it too, which is what I loved. I thought it was a great opener because you're the anxiety that kind of happens in that song already, just listening to it. It still gives me some anxiety when I hear it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's definitely dramatic, and it's a good opener. You mentioned your songwriting. Do you vary your songwriting in terms of, do you write on whatever's in front of you? Do you play with a guitar for a while, then play with keyboards for a while? Do you start with a lyric ever? How is your songwriting process?
Well, most of everything I've ever done starts with the music. I'll grab a guitar or sit down at a piano and I'll start to fool around with something. And it just kind of happens where I'll realize that I'm singing a melody and words start forming. Um, it's kind of a almost subconscious thing in a way for me. Lyrics always come after the fact. I either record it or I'll write down what I'm thinking and what's coming out of my head.
Mhm.
And then when I come back and look at it the next day, I'll like, whoa, I guess this is what I'm thinking about or what I'm feeling. So with that feeling, let me expound on that. And that's the way I've always done it. I've never taken a theme and decided, hey, I'm going to write about this theme. It's always been, I'm playing the progressions or the melody on whatever instrument that I'm doing. And all of a sudden words start coming out of my mouth. And then I realized that, oh, wow, subconsciously, this is what's coming out. And that's been with every song I've ever written.
Okay. Um, so when you look back at this thing, how cool was it that you got to play guitar on the same song as Stephen Rothery? I know you're a Marillion fan.
Oh, it's great. I mean, Steve and I are friends, and whenever we're around, we have such a great time together. He's such a great man, and I've stayed at his house in England, and he's stayed with me, and we've we've had a great relationship for the last 30 something years, which has been awesome. And it was great. It was great. I mean, we joke a lot about doing something again. I'm always telling him like, hey, when's your solo album coming out? Give me a call. If you want to burn in solo, let me know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, amazing. I honestly, Michael, I I look back at the things that happened with Enchant, and I think like how fortunate am I and the guys to have had that ride and do the things that we have done. And we weren't Marillion or Yes or Dream Theater or anybody of that magnitude, but we sure did enjoy what we had and what fans we gathered over the years, the places that we played, the tours we went on, the bands we opened for, the friends that we met. Like, Spock's Beard is a great example. All the guys in Spock's Beard, the original Spock's Beard, all the way to, the last incarnation of Spock's Beard. Those are all guys were all our friends. We
Mhm.
toured with them. We played shows with them so many times. And having those relationships, I mean, that's almost half the reward of going and being in a band and being in such a cool genre as progressive music.
Yeah, when I spoke to Neil Morse about the how strange it is that he's working with Ted so often these days. Ted's one of the guys that replaced him later in Spock's Beard, and he talked about those tours with you guys and how fun they were, just how many laughs you guys had, and how funny you and Ted and the guys in Enchant were.
Oh man, we had so much fun. And the thing was, we were just all young and crazy and living their dream. And Neil is just to say something about Neil, he's like one of the best people I've ever known. And he mentored me a little bit when we were on tour together and really turned me into a much better performer just by, him and I used to, it was so funny because all the guys would go to bed around midnight or 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And Neil and I would stay up till the sun came up every night just talking. And we talk about music and bands we loved and songs. And, he's like me and he loves so much music. I mean, we talk about Crosby, Stills, and Nash and, Elton John and Billy Joel, all these things that we used to listen to when we were kids on the radio. And he was saying the same thing. Hey, growing up where I grew up and listening to AM radio, it's like these artists really formed my musical foundations. And it's the same thing with me. And I think that's one of the reasons why we got along so well too, as bands, because all the guys are just great people in the band, and we were all really friendly, outgoing. And I remember one guy said to me, it was a promoter for, I think it was for Rosfest a couple of years ago. He said, you guys do know that you have the reputation as the nicest guys in Prague, right?" And I was like, "No, I did not know that." But we get along with everybody, so it's been great.
Well, I can tell you that was my experience. Was I was at the first Cal Prague, and I was one of the patrons at the patron dinner. So I met you and Ted and the guys that night, and that was my takeaway was that Iz and you guys were just really super nice people. So I don't know if that counts
No,
for anything.
I remember there was a brush with ego when we started headlining, when we began a headlining act and we started going out on tours and having people opening up for us. I remember Ed joking and saying, "Hey, now we get to treat people like crap." And I said, "No, no, 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 no. That's never going to happen." I said, "We need to treat every opening act like we always wanted to be treated,
Sure.
because they're us. A couple of years back, never let your head get too big." And we always had a great relationship with every band we've ever played with. We've never had a falling out with anybody, never had curse words. It's always been a really good bond. And I've always been kind of proud that not only myself, but the guys in the band were that way.
Yeah.
And really appreciated what we did have.
Yeah. So let's flash forward 10 years from Blueprint, and you guys did Tug of War, which is now 20 years old. Hard to believe this. I came into the band at juggling, so I was a little bit late to the party, but you guys went through this blink of an eye and Tug of War, all fantastic records. This one, you and Ted Leonard and Ed Platt still with the band, but Mike and Paul were gone at this point. Sean Flanagan on drums for this one, and Bill Jenkins. This was his first album with the band. So
yes.
How was it putting a new keyboard player in, and getting used to a new guy in the band, or new guys in the band?
It was, Paul and I had worked together for quite a long time. And when we were making juggling, I think was it juggling? I think it was juggling. There was one song, Paint the Picture. That was the song. And we were in the studio working on it, and I could just feel that Paul was not putting into what the song that I wanted him to put in the song. And I was working with Tom Size. We were in a pretty big studio in San Francisco at the time. It was a guy by the name of Herbie Herbert, who's a producer and a manager of bands like Journey and Huey Lewis and Roxette and Santana. I mean, he's a pretty big guy. And we're at his studio and we're recording, and the money's burning on the clock, and Paul's just not feeling the song. And it was the first time we ever got into an argument, and I just told him, like, "Man, play the freaking song. Like, what are you doing?" And he got mad, and he went in and played the performance, and the performance was way better because he was angry and he had a lot of energy in it. But we got together after it was done, and he said, "I'm really sorry. I just don't feel like this is the path for me anymore. I'm not enjoying playing the music like I used to." And we decided, after a very long and emotional conversation, that he was going to leave the band. I had no idea what I was going to do, because Paul was my right hand and he was my co-writer on just about everything we did. I mean, I did write a lot of songs by myself, but him and I were like this.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to a Giants game with Ted, and Ted and I were talking, and Ted said, "You know what, dude, you can do it. You've got the skills to write, and just do it. I'm with you 100%. I'm not going anywhere. We'll find somebody else." And I said, okay. And so I remember driving home. There was this kid, Sean Flanagan, who was a fan of the band, that I had met years before at a music store. I was wearing a Blueprint of the World shirt that doesn't say anything on it. It just has the cover with no writing. And I was buying a guitar. I was actually buying my Tom Anderson guitar that I play, the orangey kind of reddish one that I play a lot with Enchant. And I heard through the wall somebody playing Erotomania on keyboards. And I was like, is somebody playing Dream Theater? I'm like, what the heck? So I walk around the corner and there's two guys standing in the keyboards department. One of them was Sean, and the other one was this keyboard player named Matt Guillory, who played with a bunch of other progressive bands. He plays with James Murphy, and he played with another band. I can't remember. He was on Magna Carta for a while. And he was playing Erotomania. And I said, are you guys playing Dream Theater? And Sean turned around and he goes, whoa, cool Enchant shirt. And I was like, how do you know Enchant? And he goes, dude, those guys are awesome. They're like one of my favorite bands. And I said, well, that's my band. And he goes, who are you, the manager? I know it. I said, no, I'm the guitar player. And he went, you're Douglas A. Ott? He's my full name. And I go, yeah. He said, oh my gosh. So we became friends. I started inviting him to rehearsals and stuff. And he was a really good drummer. He was in a band called Chaos Theory at the time. And I loved his drumming. And he was a great guy. And I got along with him really well. And so when Paul left, I called Sean. And he was living in LA at the time. And I said, hey, how would you like to be the drummer for Enchant? And he goes, are you kidding me? I said, no. Paul and I are parting ways and I need somebody else. He goes, let me call you back. Hung up, calls me back 2 hours later. And he goes, I just quit my job. I just gave notice on my apartment. And I just broke up with my girlfriend. I'll see you in a week. And he quit and he came up here and I got him a job as a real estate appraiser because that's what I was doing at the time. And we just took off. And, you know, it's been not as many records, but a lot of touring and shows that we played. And you know, Sean was a different style drummer than than Paul was, but he was good enough drummer that he could pull Paul's parts off and also make his own mark when we started making our records with him. Mm-hmm. And I think we did maybe 3 records with Sean, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that right?
1, 2. Yeah, I think 3.
Yeah, I think 3 records with Sean. Yeah. And, you know, he's still one of my best friends in the world. I mean, Sean and I talk all the time still, you know, he lives maybe 15 minutes away from me. So.
Well, that was quite a commitment to
yeah.
drop everything.
Now with what happened with Mike was a little different story. Mike started doing other things. Mike actually lives, I think he's out in the Midwest somewhere. And he became a bluegrass guitar player. He's a really good bluegrass guitar player now and plays a lot of bluegrass music. But he was another thing. He was like, you know, I'm really not, I want to do other things with my life. I want to do other things with my music. And you know, I think it was around probably juggling that I ended up having to do a lot of keyboard parts myself. Paul played a lot of parts. I think Mike did one solo on the whole record, and the rest of the keyboards were all done by Paul and myself. And then when we did a blink of an eye, I brought in my other really good friend, close friend, Phil Bennett from Starship, and he played a lot of the solo parts, and I played most of the background parts, and he played most of the main parts on that record. And then getting Bill, you know, Bill's such a great keyboard player. He's so good, but he never really had the experience of being in the studio, recording, writing. It just wasn't really his thing at that time. So making Tug of War with him was a little challenging. Just getting the sounds that we wanted and the feel and the parts. But, you know, by the time we moved on from that album, you know, Bill just started shining like nobody's business. I mean, he's such a monster player.
Yeah, really, really strong player. So Ted also did all the guitars on See No Evil except the final solo on this album. You did piano on Comatose, Mellotron on Proctology, and strings on Beautiful. And you mentioned Tom Size. That was he and you mixed the album and you produced and recorded it. Where did you guys record the record?
At my studio in Concord, California, called the Auditorium.
Yeah. And spelled OTT.
Yeah.
Auditorium.
We you know, at a certain point, I was like, why am I going to somebody else's studio and spending tens of thousands of dollars to make a record? And from Wounded on, I was recording pretty much everything at my house except for the drums. We would go to another studio almost all the time, just a better room.
Hmm.
My room was not good for drums, but it was great for everything else. So yeah, we recorded everything there, and then the drums we recorded somewhere else. I'm trying to think where we recorded the drums for that particular record. I think it was at Herbie Herbert's studio. It's no longer there in San Francisco. I don't remember what it was called, to be honest with you, but
Okay.
it was a pretty cool place.
So let's hit some of the highlights on this one. For me, I think you guys got the opener exactly right. I think Sinking Sand is a fantastic song
Yeah.
that Ted wrote the lyrics and you and Ed wrote the music. And Ed's bass part near the end, it's not quite a bass solo, but it's this nice little interlude that gives the song something special, I think.
Yeah. Well, Ed's just an amazing tap player. I don't allow him to do much in Enchant, unfortunately. I mean, he's always been really good at it. And he's also a really good slap player as well. He grew
Yeah.
up, him and I, became best friends at 15 years old. And he loved listening to guys like Stanley Clarke and Lewis Johnson and Mark King and stuff like that. He loved that slap bassing, but he also really liked Michael Manring and guys like that started doing this tap style, and he adapted it really well. When I had written Sinking Sand, and I wrote the whole song, and then Ed said, "Hey, check out, the in progression you wrote." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, check this out," and he tapped out that part, and I go, "Dude, that's brilliant! Like, let's change the arrangement and have it break down to just the bass line. That'd be so cool." And that's what was Ed's contribution to that end section, was writing that part and putting it in there. And I thought it was just brilliant. I thought it was so cool, and the way that the band comes back in with the piano and then the guitar and it goes out. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
I
one
like
of the
I
highlights.
like long music. We've written some long songs. I'm a child of Yes and Genesis and King
Mhm.
Crimson and Pink Floyd and stuff like that. So I really like the longer things. And a lot of people have given me crap about it, like, yeah, your songs are so long, dude.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot longer ones out there, but
Oh,
I,
of course.
I think it's good because I think it gives you opportunities to do things that are interesting and not necessarily just 2.5 minute Beatles esque in and out. Start with the chorus and that kind of thing. But um, the title track, Tug of War, you said in the liner notes that you were going for a sound that was kind of Soundgarden meets Filter, and Ed said that it sounded like later era Rush, and I kind of agree with Ed that it does sound like very counterparts Test for Echoey Rush, but I mean, that could also be that that's what was influencing Rush at the time.
Yeah, that's the really cool thing about what's going on with music through the years is you start hearing things on the radio. MTV was obviously a factor for a while as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul and I were really getting interested in some of the newer bands that were coming out. Now, when grunge hit, I was like, I hated it. I wanted nothing to do with grunge. I just was like, oh, great. Pimply faced kids playing three chords and screaming. That's what I felt about it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then Stone Temple Pilots came out, and I started listening to those guys and thinking, wow, these guys are like heavy Zeppelin. There's really good chord progressions, a lot of very interesting parts happening. And it made me and Paul think, well, why can't we explore some different ideas as well? And this was around the break era, is really when that started happening. And we were like, well, let's try to do something a little more Stone Temple Pilots like, make our chord progressions a little more interesting, make them a little different, maybe add dissonance to certain songs. Where I was just like, no, it's got to be melodic all the time. That was my rule. And then once we got to break, I started thinking like, yeah, maybe we should change this up a little bit and allow some of these influences to come in. And I didn't know who Soundgarden was, honestly. And then Paul said, hey, check this out. And he brought me, I think it was Bad Motor Finger or Breath or whatever it is. And I was like, wow, like that guy can scream. And these songs are these heavy riffs are kind of cool. Maybe the grunge thing, there's more to it than I'm allowing myself to let into my world. Cause I really didn't like Nirvana very much at all. Pearl Jam didn't really impress me too much. Funny thing is, and I'll just say this real quick. I'm in a Pearl Jam tribute band now. But Pearl Jam
Life's
all
funny.
the time. And I like them a lot more than I used to. But at the time I wasn't really into it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was listening to a lot of heavier music at the time, and I was trying to capture a little more deep drop D kind of vibe with Tug of War.
Yeah. You mentioned in the liner notes also that it's a song about being sort of at war with yourself. Lyrically, was there something you were wrestling with at the time?
Yeah, I was going through kind of I don't want to say split personality, but I certainly was feeling like I was two different people, and I was trying to figure out how two different people can become one. And I was really fighting both sides of who I was and what was going on in my life. Was it going to be a family man, husband, doing a job? Was it going to be a musician, traveling, writing songs? And I just was being pulled from two different sides all the time. And I kind of felt like somebody had said, I don't remember who it was, but some friend of mine said to me, it's like, Dad, it's almost like you're fighting yourself, when I had mentioned this. And I thought, yeah, you're really right. And that was kind of the impetus of the song, was me fighting myself. And the cover is, a great, I think, adaptation of that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. It's yeah, I think it's one of my favorite Enchant covers, artwork wise. But this was a very personal song for you, but an even more personal song for you is the song Beautiful, which again, you guys don't do ballads a lot, but when you do them, you really nail them. I think this was one of
Thank you.
the highlights for me. You had an argument with your wife, and you wrote this song out, the lyrics, and for me, even though these are your words, again, one of Ted's really great performances vocally.
I totally agree. Um, I ended up getting a divorce from my first wife some years back, 5, 6 years ago now. But we had a very, very strong bond. She's still one of my best friends today. And I felt like, and I learned this as you do through the years, you gain experience, and it gives you some knowledge and some wisdom. And I saw our relationship crumbling. And I truly believe that, love and how you react to things is a choice. And I was saying that we have a choice here. We have something that's really beautiful. Now we could let it falter. We could, let it break on the ground if we want to, or we can try to do something about it. And that's what the song was really about, is I know how beautiful love is and how a beautiful love relationship is. And I just was telling her, like, we can fix this. We can do something about this. If we choose to do something about it, we focus on the right areas and do the right, the follow through, because we have such a strong foundation, we can do it. And that's where the song came from. I sat down and wrote that at the piano, and my piano was in my dining room at the time. And I sat down and wrote that song on piano, and I remember playing it for Ted, and he was like, wow, dude, this is just so powerful. And yeah, it's one of my favorite ballad songs that I've written for sure.
Yeah. The song Living in a Movie, this was one with darkly comedic lyrics, just kind of piling on the worst day possible into someone's life. And it shows that you guys have used humor. You've used humor in your lyrics before,
Yeah,
but
sure.
this is what kind of inspired you to go that way, to go, let's just, okay, I'm having a bad day, but what if we had the worst day possible? Like, walk me through that.
Well, I'm going to actually tell you something that I have never really told anybody, and Ed doesn't even know this, but that song was inspired by Ed's life. He was just going through so much stuff at the time, and it seemed like every day he would tell me something worse was happening. And I was laughing comically, going like, this is like almost like a sad sack comic book from the 70s.
Oh,
They
yeah.
I was a kid. It's like, you can't believe how much trouble this guy seems to get into. And it was like, oh, and this is a true story, by the way. He called me one night and said, my wheel came off of my car and it bounced over. He was on the Bay Bridge going to San Francisco, and it bounced over the edge of the bridge and hit a tugboat. And I just started laughing hysterically. I'm like, what? Then he calls me a week later and says, I'm standing on the side of the road. My car's on fire. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? He said, no, I had to take all my bass stuff out of the back where the front end was on fire. The fire engines are coming right now. And it just was one thing after another. And it was like a couple of months of just, and then he got a divorce, just like everything was just. So I wrote the song. Now, none of the story is actually what happened to Ed at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I made up things that because it seemed like it must be a movie. It can't be real life. Mm-hmm. This is somebody had to make this up. It can't be real. So that's where the whole living in a movie kind of thing came from. Yeah. And I just wrote a story, about all these horrible things happening to somebody. And it was really based on all these things that were happening to Ed at the time.
That's an incredible story. I think too that the song has one of my favorite guitar solos from you in it as well.
Oh, thank you. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I'll have to go back and listen to it.
Long Way Down is one where I like the way that, again, you get the harmony going in the chorus. Long Way Down. I love the way the voices blend there. And then See No Evil. That was the Ted song. When did Ted really start writing heavily for the band?
Well, Ted always was a writer. He was in a couple other bands before he joined Enchant, and he was writing in those bands, but he was more a blues guy. When he came in, he was all about Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he had the tone, the Stratocaster, playing very bluesy. But Ted's biggest influence was Kansas. He's a huge Kansas freak, and that's where his prog side came from. So he loved Steve Walsh. He loved Kerry Livgren. He loved Rich, his guitar playing. Mm-hmm. So once he started hanging out with me and the guys, we started turning him on to all these other bands like Queensryche and Yes, and, all these different progressive bands. And he started listening to that stuff, and his style started changing as a guitar player. And the first song that I think actually showed up that he'd actually written was at the end of Break. I'm trying to remember what the name of the song is. It's an acoustic piano song that Paul and I arranged. And it wasn't his arrangement. He was not happy with the arrangement that we did, but it fit better for what we were doing. I don't have my albums in front of me, and I don't think about them, but that was the first song that he had written for the band. And then after that, he started writing more, and I started really liking what he was doing. When Ted was first presenting ideas, they kind of got shot down a lot because it just wasn't really what Enchant was doing at the time. Mm-hmm. But by the time that we started getting into, some of the records where he's writing songs, like just listen to the last record, he got 2 songs on that record those are Ted songs that he wrote and then brought in, and then we kind of enchantized him, Mm-hmm. But when Ted writes, he can write really, really strong material. He really can.
One thing I forgot to mention with Living in a Movie is that Bill Jenkins has a writing credit for that. What do you remember what Bill contributed to that song?
I don't. I'd have to go back. I'd have to go back to the song. Yeah. That's the hardest thing. Actually, I got together with Paul a couple months back, and I said to him, "Hey, man, do you remember what you contributed to this particular track?" I don't remember which track it was. And he said, "Oh yeah, I wrote the bridge." I was like, "Glad you remember that, because I don't remember." Paul has an amazing memory, though. He remembers everything. I mean, he could even probably today tell me how to play songs I don't even remember how to play. Even though he was a drummer, he knew every chord that I played in every song. He's got that kind of mind. He's a great guitar player and a great piano player as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite instrumentals is on this album, Progtology.
Oh, yeah.
As the liner notes say, Progtology is the physiology and pathology of progressive music. And for me, this is a really great spotlight moment for Bill on his first Enchant album.
Yeah, fantastic. We did, I think we did a trio of prog titled instrumentals, Prognosis being the first one on blank. And I just, I don't even know why I got into. I always loved instrumentals. So I thought instrumental music was great. When Ed and I first started playing together, nobody could sing, so we had a three piece with a drummer, and we just wrote instrumental music, and it was always fun, and I really liked it. And I always liked when bands did instrumentals like Rush. They threw an instrumental out there every once in a while. And I'm also a big Steve Lukather fan, so he'd always do some sort of instrumental on one of his records, like Dave's Gone Skiing, or you know something like that. And I really, really thought it'd be fun to do, and I wanted to put prog somewhere in the title.
Yeah.
So prognosis. We started out with proctology. Bill actually came up with the name of that, and we laughed. We were at dinner one night, all having some drinks, and I said, "Hey, we need to name this new instrumental, and it has to have prog in it." And Bill said, "What about progtology?" We all started laughing, because it sounds like proctology.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, he really shines on that
did
as
that
well.
did that start with the guitar riff, or
Yeah,
how did that, is that where you started with
yeah,
that one?
yeah.
Um,
All three of the instrumentals were written on guitar originally, and then I, brought them in to the guys, and then they started doing. That's what I love about the band. I had play with really good musicians, have really good ears, and I'm able to bring in an idea, even if it's a fully formed idea, and it still gets enchantized because everybody takes whatever part that they have and makes it their own. And that's what the magic is about the band and how the songs become as good as they are. I could do all those songs by myself and they wouldn't be half as good, even though I wrote most of them, you know what I mean?
yeah. I love what the Mellotron brings to that song. The Mellotron sound really
Oh yeah.
really gives it some extra kick in the pants, and it's, you don't normally hear a Mellotron in a rockin' song like that, but
Yeah.
it's a great little like embellishment on the song, I think.
I thought it was really cool and it was fun. I mean, my record guy didn't like it. He thought the song was great. He just didn't like the Mellotron part.
Really?
And I said, why? And he goes, well, it just seems kind of cheesy to me, is what he said. And I said, well, good. Maybe it should be. It's not supposed to be, serious necessarily. The song has a sort of a whimsical kind of a vibe to it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So why not? What's wrong with that?
Yeah. And I think when you name it progtology, it automatically lends itself to don't take this so seriously,
Yeah, of course. But I'm a huge fan of comedy, and I've always enjoyed artists that have put some humor in their music. I mean, not every song, not like Weird Al Yankovic or something, but I love like guys like Todd Rundgren that would always put some sort of funny song on his record, whether it be Bang on the Drum All Day or on an onomatopoeia or something like that. It's like music doesn't have to be serious. It should be a reflection of life, and there's so much humor in life. Why can't we put that in music too? So
yeah.
that was my take on it.
Yeah, and music's not, it's also supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be stand there with your arms crossed and count it
Yeah,
out, kind of thing. Um,
exactly.
this thing, the closer is Comatose. This is another one of the great Ted vocal songs, and it's, again, this is a different type of song for Enchant. Starts off that soft piano intro and everything. Tell me about this song. What was on your mind for this song?
Well, again, back to relationship with my ex-wife at the time. I was feeling part of the Tug of War story. I was feeling like I was being torn. My wife wanted to settle down and have a family, and everything that she was saying that she wanted was something that I was not in a place to be at. I was wanting to be doing something else. And so I found myself drinking pretty heavily and sort of numbing myself and avoiding the conversation. And that was my feeling of where I was. I was literally putting myself into a coma to escape these decisions that I had to make at some point. It was going to have to come to a head.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a dark time. And the song came out very dark, and it's a very dark subject for me. And it was also me also knowing that it was going to be the end of my relationship, because I knew that I had to make the decision that was going to be best for me and not best for her. which is very, very hard to do. We didn't play the song again for years and years and years and years because I couldn't get through it. I would literally break into tears. If you ever watch the DVD during the guitar solo, I'm actually literally crying. And my ex-wife is in the audience at the time, and we were separated at the time. We were separated for a year and a half at that time. I could literally cry during the guitar solo. I made them edit it in a way that it didn't show me too much because I was very embarrassed by it, that I couldn't keep my emotions in check while playing. And I told the guys after that, I said, we're not playing the song ever again. But we did years later once I got over it. Because I love the song. I love the harmony parts, you know, and the chorus as it's going out. The outro is really cool. And yes, I was very proud of the song coming back and listening to it, you know, some 10, 12 years later, for sure.
That really kind of shows how good Ted is, because he can interpret someone else's words and make you feel them, even though they're not his thoughts.
Well, you know, that's the one thing that's really been great about our friendship and our working relationship is that, you know, for years I would just sing the song and then give it to Ted, and then Ted would sing what I sang because he's got such a great voice. And, you know, he tried to get me to sing on records for years and I just refused. It wasn't until, you know, I think Break or something, as I finally like started maybe doing something. And he always encouraged me to do it because he's like, dude, you sing everything at every live gig. It's like, why can't you do it in the studio? And, you know, much like Glenn Fry said about Don Henley, he said, you might have noticed that I started singing less and less because we had Don Henley. Like, why do I need to hear? Who wants to hear my voice when you have somebody who sings that good? I never agreed with that statement because I love Glenn Fry's voice as well. And it was like that, though. But, you know, we had Ted, so that was my thinking. I don't need to sing. I could just sing live. But Ted was pushing me to do it more and more. But, you know, I would lay down these vocals, and Ted was just always captured whatever I sang. He was so great. I mean, from the get-go, with the Thirst, Oasis, Enchanted, all those songs, I originally sang all the demos. And he was able to just really capture what emotion I laid down. He's great at doing it. And he's also really great at making it better. So whatever I originally sang, you know, we'd be in the studio and Ted would be in the booth and he'd say, hey, let me try something. And he would maybe change the melody or change the inflection or even change the cadence sometimes. And I mean, he did that with Death's Door. Even though I didn't write the lion's share of Death's Door, and Paul wrote the melody and the vocals to that, and the lyrics to it. But when we got to the second verse, Ted said, can I try something? And I was like, yeah, go ahead. And he just raised the whole level of where the vocal line was. Suddenly it was a new melody and way higher. And I thought, wow, I didn't even think of that. That's great. So, I mean, Ted's always been great at doing stuff like that. He did exactly the same thing on every song that I've ever given him.
Yeah, fantastic. So my copy of Tug of War has a bonus track, a live version of Below Zero that you wrote on, and it was on Wounded. This one was recorded, I think, at 2002's Near Fest.
Yeah.
Now, how cool is it for a prog band to play a place like Near Fest or Rozfest or the first ever Cal Prog? You guys were doing these festivals, and you know, our music is largely underground and has been for decades, but you have these opportunities to come together and see, you know, what would have been your peers and favorite bands of all of us that attended these shows. What was that like for you to be invited to play those and to go and play them and know that you have a job to do, but also how cool it is that you get to see these other bands too?
Oh, it's amazing. That's the one thing about the prog community. You know, in the 80s, when I was in the, you know, hair band era, playing in bands, there was always competition with bands. And it was always, we're going to blow these guys off the stage kind of a mentality. I actually got into a few physical altercations back then with other band members of other bands talking shit about my band, you know, kind of thing. And progressive music's never been like that. It's always been a community of like-minded individuals. And it's really cool when you go on the Yes Cruise or you go to, you know, Cal Prog or whatever it is, and you get to see a guy like Mike Keneally, who's just an amazing artist, amazing player, you know, walking up playing acoustic guitar, handing it to me and say, "Play me something, Doug." And so I start playing something, and he's like, "Oh, that's cool. Give me another guitar." And then all of a sudden, he's playing something with me. And there was no like, "Oh, I'm better than you. You're better than me," kind of thing. It was just like two guys just having fun.
Mm.
Backstage at Cal Prague, I sat in the back of the stage while some of the artists were playing piano with Nick DiVigilio, and him and I were playing all these piano songs together. And he knew a lot of these great old prog songs like I do. So, and we were just laughing and having so much fun. And that's the community that it is. It's just great. It's awesome. And we've become friends with so many great bands, you know, like John Mitchell from Lonely Robot and Arena. I mean, I met him at an Arena show, and you know, I was introduced to him, and he said, "Wait a second, you're the guy from Enchant." He's like, "Oh, dude, I love your records, man. I'm totally a fan of yours." And we became really good friends. And you know, I love seeing him. Every time I see him, I'm just like so happy. And I've got a lot of friends in a lot of bands like that. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
Ted became good friends with the singer of Haken, and you know, I mean, we've we've been lucky. We've been really lucky, and every time we do something with other bands, I'm always really happy because like I get to see. I mean, the first time I saw Saga was on the Yes Cruise, and they were my like one of my top three bands of all time.
Yeah.
And you know, I saw them, got to meet them, and like a year later, I'm getting a call from Michael Sadler to play guitar with him on the festival out in New Jersey.
Okay.
And you know, we got Ed and Jimmy Keegan to play from Spock's Beard to play drums, and it was pretty much three Enchant dudes, you know, a Spock's Beard guy, and Ted also played on a couple songs, and then Michael Sadler, you know, here we are playing On the Loose with Michael Sadler. I mean, I'm looking at Ed, we're almost in tears, singing like you know, we were trying to figure this material out in our bedrooms when we were kids, you know, at 16, 17 years old, and here I am playing with one of my idols. And then, you know, 6 months later, we're on the Yes Cruise playing with him again. And I mean, that's just like the highlight for me. You know, I can die now.
Yeah, I had a big old grin on my face because I've had Michael on the show. I've had John Mitchell on the show. Huge fan of everything John Mitchell does. And Michael was putting together a project. He was getting ready to. They were getting ready to do that tour, and I got to talk to him a little bit about Worlds Apart, which was a favorite album of mine in the '80s. And I was going to ask you about Saga because to me, I was going to ask you about your guitar tone because your tone to me somewhat reminds me of if you took Rothery and the Saga guitar sound and mixed them together. Was that your intent, or did you just come upon your tone naturally?
You know, as a guitar player, we joke about this. Guitar players joke about this all the time. The endless search for tone, right? You're constantly buying new amps and new pedals and guitars and pickups and everything you could possibly do to try to find that tone, whatever it is. You know, and a lot of guys find it and then they stick with it, like Eddie Van Halen, the first Van Halen album. When you heard that going out, it sounded like, where did that come from? Never heard a guitar sound like that in my entire life. Steve Ray Vaughan, same thing. But then you go into the prog world, Hackett, his guitar tone, so different than anybody else's. Hal's guitar tone, totally different from anybody else's. Well, Ian was like that too. Ian had a little heavier sound to me. And
Mm-hmm.
coming, you know, growing up listening to, you know, Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne and Michael Shankner and Thin Lizzy and, you know, all these bands that I was into, I liked a little heavier guitar sound. So I gravitated more towards the heavier guitar sound with Enchant and tried to say, okay, well, at the time I was the only guitar player. So let's make me a little heavier. You know, we still have that keyboard element for very strong. At the time with Paul, he was obviously very much into Neil Peart and had a very strong, defined way of playing. We loved Geddy Lee's bass sound. You know, we loved that Chris Squire sound. And so we tried to incorporate all those kind of things in it. It wasn't until I discovered Marillion that I went like, oh my gosh, I need to change what I'm doing a little bit. I need to focus more on some clean sounds as well. And, you know, that's the things I had always loved about Steve Rothery too, is that his sound is so different and unique. I mean, obviously he was influenced by Hackett and, you know, Gilmore, But man, his playing, I always loved his playing. When I first heard Steve play a solo of Kaylee, I thought to myself, I'm doing this all wrong. And you know, you could listen to the progression of my playing through the records, and I started slowing down and being more melodic, because to me that spoke to me more than trying to be Yngwie or a guy who just played a bunch of fast, really notes.
Yeah.
Which is what I was trying to do in my youth. I was trying to play as fast as I could and be as most impressive as I can. But all of a sudden I realized, like, you know what? Listen to what David Gilmour does. Like, he can say more with one note than any shred guitar player does with a million. So my style started changing a little bit. But my tone, I got, you know, Mesa Boogie's out here in Petaluma. It's about an hour away from me, and they're pretty heavily influenced out here in the California rock scene. A lot of people gravitated away from the Marshall English sound and started to go this American boogie sound. And a lot of the heavier bands had that. So I got into boogie, and that really is what kind of made me have that kind of sound. Was a little heavier sound, was the boogie amps.
Okay. Doug, what are you up to now? What are you working on? You mentioned the Pearl Jam cover band. What is keeping you busy? I know a couple of weeks ago you said you had a really full plate over the weekend.
Well, I'm in like 5 bands. I play about 4 to 5 nights a week. I travel a lot with these bands as well. So I'm in a Pearl Jam tribute band. I'm in a Police tribute band. I'm starting an STP tribute band right now. I play in a country rock band, and I have a 70s band where I do all 70s AM radio music. I also play acoustic solo all the time. So that keeps me really busy. And I also have a full-time job as a construction guy. So, and I have a 15-year-old daughter and a wife that I've been married to for 3 years. So I'm very, very busy.
Yeah.
Not a lot of time. There's not a lot of Doug times, put it that way.
Is there a way for people to keep up with your various tribute bands that you're working in?
You know, I post everything on Instagram and Facebook, all my gigs. That's about all I do on social media. I very rarely post anything else these days. But yeah, if anybody wants to, you know, follow my social media, then you'll find out what I'm doing and where I'm at.
All right.
And I still, you know, we're still in talking about making another Enchant record. So sorry for the delay, but I really hope, and all the guys do. We all really want to do something again. It's just trying to find the time to get it to happen.
Yeah. Are you keeping up with what are the other guys doing in this hiatus? What have they been up to?
Well, you know, Sean is he's a real estate appraiser, has his own business, and he's very active with his son, who plays guitar and is in baseball, really, really big baseball player. So he's really involved in his life. He was in an AC/DC tribute band for a long time called Long Gone Bon, and they did all the Bon Scott stuff. Ed has played in a bunch of different bands as well. He was in a Whitesnake tribute for a while and played in another band doing some cover stuff and some originals. Bill has, you know, made a solo record. If you haven't checked it out, you should check it out. It's really cool. He also did another record with Thought Chamber in the meantime.
Okay.
Another really amazing record for his playability is just insane on that record. And Ted obviously was still busy doing all the things that he does with all the bands and the different things he does, which, you know, a side note here, just so proud of I used to call him my little brother Ted, because you know, he's like 8 years younger than me, but yeah, he just blossomed, and, you know, super proud of everything he's done.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been fun for me. I've really enjoyed finding out a little bit more about these records, and we'll have to have you back to talk about some of the others when they have anniversaries coming up too.
Sure, anytime.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Doug, for your time. I wish you nothing but the best, and we'll be looking out for that next Enchant album whenever you guys are able to get together and do it.
Sounds good, Michael. Thank you so much.